Well, I just want to let you know I appreciate so much you offering to include me as part of the conversation today. And what I'd like to bring to you today is a little bit of discussion about the idea of water supply in our service area, and I'll talk to you about that. The idea of reliability, which is a concept that has really driven water service in Southern California for a long time, but introduced the notion of resilience and how those two things might be a little bit different, and how we're working to address issues related to resilience. So to do that, I just want to start with some basics. Some of this may be things that you already know, but we need to cover them just to be able to understand the topic today, and then we'll get into some history also. So first, let's just start off with the agency that I represent and work for, Metropolitan Water District. And thank you for talking about us as a wholesaler, Phyllis. There's a key difference here. We are a wholesale water agency. So what that means is we don't deliver water to individual consumers. We actually bring water to our member agencies that are cities like the city of Pasadena, and water districts in Southern California, 26 of these agencies, and then they convey that water to the individual consumers. We are actually the largest treated water provider in the United States of America, and I'll show you some of the facilities that we operate. But the service area that you see on this graphic is really most of urban Southern California in the yellow there. About 19 million residents in the service area that we provide water for. And when you think about that territory, 6 different counties covered by it, from Ventura in the north through LA County, Orange County, parts of Riverside and San Bernardino, and San Diego County, we provide about half the water that's used in that service area. So it fluctuates from year to year, but it gives you a sense of what we're doing. Now, when you think about Southern California water supplies, I just wanted to give you a very quick overview here. There are a number of key components of those supplies that are used in this service area. The first is the Colorado River Aqueduct that is bringing water from the Colorado River. We were brought into being as an entity to build that aqueduct and bring this water into Southern California. The other area that I would mention is the Los Angeles Aqueduct. It was developed by the city of LA, and that aqueduct system brings water principally for the city of Los Angeles to use, another imported supply. Here you also see the Northern Sierra Mountains. You see snowmelt moves from those Northern Sierra Mountains into Lake Oroville, and then down into the Bay Delta area, which you should see in that kind of red circle right here. It moves through the Bay Delta to the headworks of the canal system for the State Water Project, and that water moves down into Southern California also. We are the largest contractor for State Water Project supplies in the state of California, so we receive those supplies. And finally, you've got a mixture of other supplies that are developed here locally within the region. The largest component there is groundwater, but you've also got recycled water that's being used. You've got some seawater desalination, and then major conservation programs. And we kind of consider conservation as a supply. As we invest in people becoming more efficient, it acts the same way as a supply in that it reduces additional supply that you'd need to develop. So that's kind of the mix of things. And I wanted to share with you this graphic that shows, you might see other areas around the world that you've probably heard of in the news lately. Australia, you probably heard about in recent years. A little bit with respect to droughts in, say, Cape Town in South Africa, drought effects in Spain and Portugal. And one of the things that we have in common with these areas is they're all Mediterranean climates. So I and my team, we're constantly comparing notes with folks at these other areas to learn how people are ensuring that they can provide reliable water supplies. This graphic gives you a sense of some of the challenges that we're facing. And this was a study that was done by University of Columbia that shows the likelihood of having a drought of a decade long or longer over the course of the next 100 years. And the darker red the area is, the more likely it is that you're going to face that. And so we're not the worst in the nation in terms of that risk. but we're obviously pretty red here. So you can see we are likely to see pretty severe drought events going forward. And this is another way of looking at it. This graphic gives you a sense of how variable is the precipitation, the rainfall and snowfall that you see throughout the United States. And the dots show you a measure of that variability. And of all the areas in the United States, the darker the dots are, the more variable. California is the most variable, and specifically Central and Southern California are even more variable. So this is a wide range of year types that you'd see, very, very dry or very, very wet. And this is what we have to contend with. And at Metropolitan, we view our role as really providing the region with that reliability in the face of that variable conditions, the droughts. That's what reliability is about for us. And so this is actually pulled from one of our policy statements related to reliability. I wanted you to see this. It's that we're going to work with our member agencies, and we're going to provide the ability to meet full service demands amongst our consumers under, and I've underlined, foreseeable hydrologic conditions. That's what reliability means to us. So it's hydrologic. Our reliability goal is based on, hydrologic uncertainty. And what I'd like to introduce to you is that there is another piece that we have to account for beyond hydrologic uncertainty. Every agency plans for that. It's this notion of resilience that goes beyond hydrology. It goes beyond droughts. And that's really what I wanted to talk to you about today. So to get there, let's talk a little bit about what we've already done to make sure that we're reliable. This goes way back. This is really the beginning of Metropolitan. And I know it's kind of hard to read, but this was a graphic that we used when we were promoting the initial bond sales for developing the aqueduct, our Colorado River Aqueduct. This was shown in movie houses at the time. And what you can see is this graphic was saying Southern California is using about 170 million gallons a day more than is being replaced. So that was the pitch for why we needed this aqueduct system to help out. You'll probably recognize this. We were trying to sell the idea, and we had a float in the Rose Parade. And what you see here is 13 stars. This corresponds with the 13 original cities and agencies that were supporting the formation of Metropolitan, of which the city of Pasadena was one of those stars. And this was the system map that was envisioned. It's kind of cartoonish, but you can see here all of the different cities that were supporting the formation of Metropolitan to bring this Colorado River supply in. And you see Pasadena right here amongst other major partners that were helping to make this happen at the time. Well, you flash forward to where we are today. The Metropolitan of today is, as I mentioned earlier, the largest treated drinking water supplier in the US. We've got 5 treatment plants around Southern California. The only treatment plant in the nation that's larger than ours is the one that serves the city of Chicago. They have a single plant that serves most of the city of Chicago. We have 10 major reservoirs, a world-class water quality laboratory conducting more than 200,000 tests a year. You see a little cutaway here of one of our pipeline segments. When you think about Met, we're not talking about small lines. We're talking about oftentimes pipelines that are big enough to drive a truck or a car through, and major pumping facilities that bring that water along the Colorado River there. This is just another way of looking at the system we've developed. This is a network of pipelines that move water around and through Southern California. The total replacement cost, if you will, of this system that serves all of these agencies here in Southern California is about $23 billion. So that's one way of thinking about the system that we have in place. So let's talk a little bit about resilience. I had shown you a definition of reliability, but what does resilience mean? And I'm not going to go through these definitions verbatim, but you'll see a number of things that pop out in these definitions. They're either from presidential directives. In one case, it's from here, the resilience bond that was talked about earlier this year. And this bottom one is policy that we have at Metropolitan that guides our seismic activity to make sure that we can be resilient to seismic activity. And the words that are often common here: shocks to the system, disruptions. You see shocks again here: ability to survive, to recover, to absorb and rebound from basically shocks to the system. Different ways of thinking about resilience. So what are these shocks? Here are a few pictures of different things: increased climate variability or changes in runoff timing that you might see in snowmelt, sea level rise down here, and saltwater intrusion, reduced snowpack, aging infrastructure, higher load demands. Are these the kinds of shocks that people think about when you're thinking about resilience? And I guess I would propose to you that they aren't. These are basically the core things that every water agency has to deal with and has to think about in planning for reliable supplies. What about these? Environmental regulations, the wildfire risk that has popped up recently at a scale that is very different than before, and the water quality issues that come about as a result of that. Emergent groundwater contamination, where you see technology moving from being able to measure things in parts per million to just a few years ago we could measure in parts per billion, to now there's technology that allows us to measure things in parts per trillion, and you're starting to find things that we didn't know were there before, and now regulations pop up. How do you manage with those? And a big one is seismic uncertainty. These are some of the things that I think about in terms of potential shocks to the system that we have to be resilient to. And I want to go into a little bit of detail on some of these. This is a graphic of that Southern California area. Again, the orange is our service area. And the first thing you'll see here is the Los Angeles Aqueduct coming through in purple. Then you'll see the State Water Project. It actually splits into two branches, one that moves to the west and one that moves to the east, but both of those branches are bringing water into our service area. And finally, in blue, you see the Colorado River Aqueduct. And what's that red line that is dashed that cuts across all of them? That's the San Andreas Fault. So we know each of these imported systems, if the big one cuts loose, could be cut off for a period of time while people have to work to repair those lines. And so we've got to be resilient to that risk. This is an aerial view, one way of looking at an aerial view of the Bay Delta. And remember that I was mentioning that you have water that melts from the northern Sierras, moves down, and actually moves through this Bay Delta system to the State Water Project pumps, of which we benefit from, and also the Central Valley pumps. And take a look at this area. When you look at this, this is not a natural system. This is a channelized set of islands that are protected by levees, and water moves around those islands through those channels to get down to the water supply systems I was talking about. Why are we concerned about that? Well, this is another way of looking at that area, and you can see those islands are anywhere from 5 feet to as much as 30 feet below the water level. Those levees are protecting those islands, and the water that we're using on the State Water Project moves right through in between those islands. So we have concerns with that subsidence. What might happen when, say, you have a seismic event? And an example here is the Bay Delta is in the upper right-hand corner of this graphic. These are all fault lines that are very near the Bay Delta, and recent projections have shown that you can have upwards of a 6.5 magnitude earthquake happen over the course of the next 30 years. What are the odds of that? Probably close to 75% chance. So we know there's a major risk of that seismic activity causing levee failures that result in significant saltwater intrusion into those islands. Those islands then become saltwater sinks, and our challenge is that you would then potentially lose the ability to move water through the delta, drinking water through the delta for a period of years. So these are some of the things that we're thinking about in terms of that risk. In addition to seismic risks, I'm showing you a picture here from 2004 of a levee failure in the delta. And so it isn't just seismic, it's also flood risk that's exacerbated as you see sea level rise. So there's a long list. I wanted to give you a few examples of some of the risks that we're concerned about when we think about what we need to be resilient to. And now let's talk a little bit about actions that we are taking along with our agencies, our member agencies, to be resilient. Fundamental, the first one is diversifying our supplies. The pie graphic you see here on the left is what made up water supplies for Southern California back in 1990. And about 40%, you can see, this portion of the pie in orange and blue, 40% were local supplies that were generated here within the region. And the rest, about 60%, were imported supplies. One could argue it was even higher on the imported supply because this graphic includes the LA Aqueduct in that local supply. And you know, one could argue LA Aqueduct is also an imported supply. If you look on the right, this is our plan for where we're heading. And we've been executing this plan for a number of years now to get to a point where we are much more reliant on a diverse set of local supplies, and the imported portion of the pie is smaller. So it's actually almost reverse from where it was in 1990. We've also worked to develop and are working to maintain a very flexible delivery system. This is another way of looking at that infrastructure I showed you on a previous graphic, and you can see in green, state water project supplies moving into our system. The areas that are green are typically receiving state water project supplies. The areas that are blue are typically receiving Colorado River supplies. And where you see the orange, we have mixing that goes on in our system, blending that goes on. And people that live in these areas, when they're getting imported water, they're drinking a combination of state water project and Colorado River supplies without even knowing it. This is a typical operation. What I meant by flexibility in this system is an example in a recent, very, very dry year in the state of California. We received very little state water project supplies. But what we were able to do was bring in Colorado River supplies and tap into some of our storage reserves so that most of the service area was actually receiving Colorado River supplies when we didn't have very much on the state water project system. And similar in terms of flexibility, we saw the opposite occur in a very recent, very wet year. 2017 was incredibly wet in the state of California, and we had a lot of state water project supplies. So we backed off on our Colorado River deliveries, and we were able to store that water in Lake Mead, and instead we were using state water project supplies, and people that lived here in Southern California were drinking state water project water if they were taking imported supplies at the time. So that seamless, very, very flexible system is very important. We've also invested in our own manufacturing shops. Most of these shops are actually in the city of Laverne. And we have the ability with our own heavy equipment and those manufacturing shops. What you see here is steel plate that we store. We have in those manufacturing shops the ability to roll our own pipe so that at any given time, we could be dealing with 2 major breaks in our system throughout the region at any given time, and our staff is able to mobilize and to go out and fix those breaks in the system when an event occurs. And again, I'm not talking about the small pipelines. I'm talking about being able to fix breaks on 6 to 12-foot pipelines, very, very large diameter. You see some of the equipment here at our shops, but when we get beyond COVID-19 period where we can start doing inspection trips again, I'd love to be able to get some of you out to see these facilities if you're interested. We've also done a lot to develop storage reserves, and this shows the capacity of the storage we've invested in with reservoirs and groundwater storage to be able to capture and store water supply. This is just the capacity, about a 14-fold increase since 1980 to develop that capacity. The poster child for this is really Diamond Valley Lake out in the city of Hemet. This is the largest surface water reservoir in Southern California, and we brought that online in 1999, early 2000s. This is water in storage. And what you see here is that it fluctuates quite a bit over the years. So we're using that water in these storage facilities to buffer the region from the impacts of drought. And then in the really wet years to rebuild that storage. What you see here on the right is that our storage is at the highest levels that it's ever been here in 2020. I want to draw your attention to the orange on the bottom. That orange on the bottom, we refer to as emergency storage. We have a policy that we will hold a certain amount of water. It's actually 750,000 acre-feet of water. When you think about an acre-foot, 1 acre-foot is enough for a family in Southern California to use, actually 3 families. So 3 households for a year. 750,000 acre-feet of water in emergency storage. And our policy is that we keep that in storage that is within the region, that is this side of the fault zone, so that if the San Andreas Fault were to cut loose and we were to be cut off from our imported supplies, we would have enough water to be able to make it through the period of time to repair those imported lines and be able to restore deliveries through those imported lines. So you're assured that you've got supply here inside the fault zone. Another piece that I wanted to talk about is deliveries in the Bay Delta. Remember that I talked to you a little bit about some of the risks of those in the Bay Delta. This gives you a sense of one of the things that we're working on with the state to be able to move water beneath the Delta through a tunnel system. This is known as Delta Conveyance, so that we're avoiding the risk of those island failures under seismic and flood events in the future. And this gives you a sense of what we're doing through the new facilities that are being proposed by the governor's office in the state of California. They're working on an environmental planning process right now for Delta Conveyance, and what I'm showing you here is the conceptual plans for a couple different alignments for that conveyance system that will help to make that Bay Delta system more resilient. And finally, the last step that I wanted to talk about is work that we're doing to develop a regional source of recycled water. We are in a partnership with LA County Sanitation District, and what you see on this graphic is the location of their joint water pollution control plant in the city of Carson. If you look at water that goes out to the ocean, the outfall at that plant in the city of Carson is the largest discharger of wastewater into the ocean in the state of California. And our partnership there is to take that water, to purify it at a treatment plant here in the city of Carson, and to develop a distribution system that will bring that purified water out to a series of groundwater basins, including the main San Gabriel Basin, and ultimately to connect that infrastructure with our existing treatment plants. This is the treatment plant in the city of Laverne. We refer to that as the Weymouth treatment plant. And at that point, that purified water would go through yet again another standard filtration process, and in the future would be able to move out through those blue lines to provide treated drinking water throughout Southern California. So you can see Metropolitan takes these risks very seriously. We are taking action along with our member agencies to both provide a reliable system that is resilient to these kinds of risks. I really want to acknowledge the work with your member agency, the city of Pasadena, and many others in partnership to help make these things a possibility. We can't do that without this collaboration. And I want to acknowledge that we have to be adaptive. Much of what I shared today, 20, 30 years ago, were not on people's radar screen. And as we identify new risks, we've got to adapt to them, and the plan will change going forward as you learn more about the risks that we face. With that, I very much appreciate the opportunity to spend this time with you today and have a conversation with you. and look forward to Q&A. Thank you very much.
Liable is the Raymond Basin. I've seen a decline in the curve that has some of us in need of MWD's help in understanding what can be done.
So the Raymond Basin is a core source of supply for Pasadena and the neighboring area. And I had talked a little bit, one of the questions was about the groundwater table and sustainable groundwater table levels. And so in response to changes in groundwater levels and the view of what was sustainable, I know the Raymond Basin just a number of years ago had reduced that notion of the sustainable pumping yield by about 30%. And so with that reduction, obviously you then have to think about, okay, one, where does the alternative supply come from? And in that case, there was a swing to imported supply. We were providing a little bit more water. Actually, we are providing a little bit more water as a percent now. You've also, though, seen a greater degree of efficiency in that same area. So you're seeing demands that have dropped a little bit, which helps. Last year, we were able to do a program that was intended to provide some benefits to the basin by delivering what we call in lieu replenishment supplies. And what I mean by that is it was a pretty wet year, and we ran a program. We worked with the folks over at the city of Pasadena to take a little bit more imported water in a wet year and then back off of some of the groundwater pumping in the Raymond Basin to be able to provide some relief off the basin. We're looking at ways to be able to do more of that, not just in the Raymond Basin, but to do more of that in other basins here in Southern California in the wetter conditions as a way to help.
Thank you so much. I didn't realize it was gone that long. Thank you so much, Deven. You're all wonderful.
Thank you very much.
I appreciate your time. Peace.
It's great to see you all.
Thank you so much. I will see all the rest of you next week.
Take care.
Have a great one.